Hi, future sleepy self. Tonight, we're drifting back almost 2,000 years to a very smoky summer in the year 64 CE, Rome. The empire was at its absolute height of power, and at the same time, kind of a chaotic mess, because Rome always was. So picture it, marble temples, crowded tenement apartments, senators squabbling forever about taxes, and of course, the emperor himself, Nero. The man, the myth, the fellow history has painted as some kind of pyromaniac villain who played the lyre while Rome burned. Spoiler, the reality is likely not quite so sensational, but still, Nero was odd. And odd emperors and enormous citywide conflagrations add up to a tale that's practically too good for bedtime. Setting the scene, Rome before the fire. Rome in the 60s CE wasn't really a very safe place to be. The city had been growing too fast, filled with cheap, sloppily constructed wooden apartment buildings known as insulae. Picture shoddy, low-cost construction, highly flammable, piled on top of each other like so many tinder boxes. Throw in cooking fires, oil lamps, and the occasional drunken Roman stumbling against a torch, and yeah, it's a wonder the entire city didn't burn down every week. In addition to this, there were tiny streets, so that when a fire took hold, the firemen, yes, they did have firemen, and they were called vigiles, were unable to get in to extinguish it. So Rome was basically the ancient version of keeping your phone plugged in under your pillow each night. It was just a matter of time before something caught on fire. And then there was Nero, our guy. Nero was the original theater kid emperor. Nero was no ordinary emperor. He wasn't a tough-as-nails general or an ugly politician. He was essentially a theater nerd who sort of fell into the world's biggest empire. Born in 37 CE as Lucius Domitius Aenobarbus, yes, bronze-bearded because Roman family names were actually that clever, Nero was adopted by Emperor Claudius. Claudius, himself not exactly stable, thought, yeah, let's just adopt this kid and make him the next in line. Thus, Nero ascended to the throne at the age of 16. 16! Ponder giving the keys to the world's largest empire to someone who, by today's standards, couldn't even lease an automobile. And Nero's interests weren't so much empire-focused. He liked to sing, he liked to act, he liked being in front of the crowd, which in Roman society was just as respectable as being a TikTok influencer today. Senators would veil their faces when Nero sang so they could avoid seeing him shame. But Nero refused. He did not want to be admired as an artist, yet dreaded as a tyrant, which is quaint in a completely catastrophic manner for state leadership. July 64 CE. The Spark. Now, let us fast forward to July of 64 CE. Summer. It is warm, and late one evening, in the stores along the Circus Maximus, a fire erupts. We do not know why. Maybe a spark, maybe a kitchen accident, maybe some angry Roman seeking to collect on an insurance policy. But this wasn't a fire. This thing spread fast. The wind carried it through the city like it had a mission. And before long, entire blocks were ablaze. Days, then 3 more days of smoldering. 2/3 of Rome were lost or severely damaged by the time it was over. Houses, temples, markets, all lost. Now, if this had been any other emperor, folks would have groaned and attributed it to bad luck. But it was Nero, and there was a reputation to uphold. Did Nero really fiddle? Now, let's address the elephant in the room. There's a legend that Nero was seated on a balcony fiddling while Rome burned. Such a wonderful movie scene. Too filmy. The problem is, fiddles hadn't yet been invented. The Romans did have the lyre, an instrument with strings that had some similarity to a harp that you might be able to carry under the arm. So no, Nero wasn't strumming away on his fiddle, at least not literally. Ancient sources report that he may have sung songs of the fall of Troy as the city burned, which, honestly, is even more bizarre. Like, imagine your city's burning, and the president comes over to give a dramatic reading of the Iliad. But the truth is, Nero wasn't even in Rome when the fire happened. He was at his house in Antium, about 30 miles outside Rome, lounging near the sea. When the news reached him, he came back rapidly and actually organized relief. He opened up his gardens to house refugees, organized supplies of food, and tried to put out the fires, which, inconveniently for him, didn't fit the villainy playbook people wanted. Why blame Nero? So why did everyone suspect Nero's guilt? Well, a couple of reasons. First, there were rumors that he was eager to make room for his new palace complex, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. And by the way, yes, after the fire, he did build it, a gigantic, decadent mansion with gardens, fountains, and a revolving dining room. Nice and subtle. To detractors, Nero had only let the city burn so that he might build himself an elitist bachelor pad. And second, Nero was not everyone's best bet for popularity among high elite circles. The senators did not like him because he made them sit through his musical concerts. Aristocrats felt he was diminishing the nobility of the empire. Blaming Nero for having set ablaze half of Rome therefore neatly fit into the rumor mill. And finally, it's human nature. Humans need someone to lay their finger on when things don't go their way. And who better to lay their finger on than the quirky emperor who already seemed a bit nutty? The scapegoats. The Christians. Nero wasn't dim, of course. He quickly realized that everyone was throwing him some shady side-eye, so he needed another scapegoat. Stand up, the Christians. At this point, Christianity was a small, fringe sect in Rome. The Romans saw them as strange agitators who would not worship the official gods. Convenient scapegoats. So, Nero blamed Christians for the fire, and then it got ugly. He ordered mass arrests, and they were executed in sadistic public spectacles, burned alive, torn apart by animals, that kind of thing. Not exactly great PR. This persecution would later cement Nero as the ultimate villain in Christian writings. So if you've ever wondered why Nero's reputation as a mad tyrant survived so strongly, well, the early Christians had a big role in making sure no one forgot. After the blaze, with so much of Rome reduced to ashes, Nero finally laid the first stone on his baby, the Domus Aurea. This wasn't just a palace, this was architectural flexing. Picture it, a huge complex with artificial lakes, giant gardens, a gigantic golden statue of himself, and yes, that rotating dining room where dinner guests could literally dine as the ceiling rotated with the stars. When everyone was grumbling that it was too expensive, Nero allegedly replied, "Now at last I can begin to live like a human being," which is one way of putting it. The palace actually became the very embodiment of Nero's egotism in the popular imagination. Even if he didn't burn Rome down, building a gargantuan golden palace over smoldering ruins wasn't exactly heartwarming and mind-altering. A slow decline. And from there, Nero's reign began to wobble. Rumors of his role in the fire, the economy in shambles, rebellions breaking out, and even the guards turning on him at the end. It took just 4 years after the fire, in 68 CE, for Nero to leave Rome. With his life in danger of being captured, Nero killed himself at age 30. By legend, his final words were, "What an artist dies in me." Just fine. Because Nero was not remembered as a statesman or as a soldier or even as a politician. He was remembered as an artist who was in the wrong job, a guy who thought he could sing his way into immortality and become the poster child of imperial disaster. 1. Let's stroll into Nero's Rome before the flames. Rome wasn't actually in prime condition either. The city was overcrowded, rowdy, and literally smelled like a dumpster fire before the actual dumpster fire came along. It was akin to wooden apartments standing teeteringly high, alleys that were so tight 2 donkeys couldn't fit through them, and tens of thousands of human beings crammed together without, any kind of fire department. Yeah, the whole town was essentially one huge tinderbox. And Nero? Well, he wasn't exactly Mr. Responsible. He had been emperor since he was a teenager, which, if you've ever met a teenager, already sounds like a recipe for disaster. Instead of focusing on, say, governing an empire, Nero preferred the fun stuff: theater, music, poetry, and pretending he was basically the Beyoncé of the ancient world. And picture this: the Emperor of Rome, the world's ruler, clad in silk, on a podium, lyre in hand, crooning love ballads. And not very good ones, according to the critics then. Suetonius and Tacitus, our own historians, tell us that he forced spectators to listen to him sing, and leaving the room was basically out of the question. Guards would actually guard the doors to keep anyone from getting away. You would have to sit there, smile pleasantly, and listen to Nero warble. Hours. So yeah, not the most focused leader. And the Senate, the aristocrats, the generals weren't exactly pleased with this artistic emperor who was more interested in karaoke night than he was in ruling the empire. But one great dream Nero did have. He wanted to rebuild Rome. The corkscrew streets and random layout of the ancient city just weren't glamorous enough for him. He dreamed of wide boulevards, colossal buildings, and a palace so large that even the gods would covet it. Only problem was, most of the land he had in mind was already taken up by, other people's houses.
Become a bit suspicious. Because just months before the fire, Nero had already been dreaming up grand city rebuilding plans. He dreamed of rebuilding Rome in marble, with symmetry and order. And he wasn't shy about it either. Everyone knew he had to make way. So when the fire came and, conveniently enough, laid waste to a big part of the city, well, you can guess what people believed. But before we dive into the flames themselves, let's float over to what life in the city felt like for the average Roman at this time. Picture yourself stretched out in a cramped insula, one of those thin wooden apartment houses. You've got people living around you, rowdy, dirty, occasionally smelly. Somebody above you is probably flinging garbage out the window. Downstairs, vendors shout as kids play in the street. The alleys are filled with carts, donkeys, and food carts. And beneath it all, the sewers. Just don't think about it. It was a crazy, humming, jammed city. And if you've ever been in a kitchen that's too full, you understand how one misplaced spark can ignite the whole thing. Take that and multiply it by, say, 1,000,000 people, and you get Rome. So, when the blaze broke out on that sweltering July evening in 64 AD, it wasn't surprising that it swept on like, well, wildfire. The fire began in the Circus Maximus section. If you're picturing some enormous chariot racing stadium, you're right. Imagine rows of wooden shops and stalls around it, filled with the gills of oil, grain, cloth, and all the burnables you can think of. Not the best place to store your burnables, but ancient urban planning wasn't always OSHA regulated either. The fires spread rapidly. Older histories report it spreading so fast that people didn't have time to grab anything they could carry with them before the flames engulfed blocks. Embers were swept by the wind, setting roofs ablaze all over the city. People took to the streets, carrying whatever they could lay their hands on. Others didn't even bother trying, because honestly, where do you go when an entire city is on fire? It smoldered for 9 days. 9 whole days. Imagine a week and a half where everything that surrounds you is just flames, fire, and destruction. The sound of burning buildings, animals screaming, and people running around. That was Rome. And here's where Nero enters the story. According to legend, and you've probably heard this one, he stood on a tower, watching the flames, and sang while playing his lyre. The story goes that he performed the Sack of Troy, a dramatic song about another city that was famously destroyed by fire. So, not exactly great PR. But here's the thing. This Nero fiddled while Rome burned story, total myth. First, fiddles hadn't yet been invented. That's like claiming that Julius Caesar texted Brutus before getting stabbed. Doesn't quite ring true. Historians today argue that Nero was not in Rome when the fire started. He was at his villa in Antium. On hearing the news, he rushed back to the city, set up relief work, opened public buildings to the homeless, and even personally gave food to survivors. So in theory, Nero did a good deed. But you know how everyone loves a good rumor. The story of Nero just standing there playing his lyre as the city burned was too good to pass up. And with his reputation for being a drama king, it was believable enough.
Finally died down after 9 terrible days. The city of Rome was barely recognizable. Of the 14 quarters of the city, only 4 were untouched, according to ancient writers. 3 were destroyed, and the rest, half gutted, half standing, charred remains of what had once been homes, temples, and bazaars. Imagine walking through those streets behind the fire, still thick with smoke in the air, ash under your sandals, smashed columns lying broken on the ground, family members searching for lost loved ones amidst the ruins. It was no fire. It was trauma left imprinted on the city itself. And the survivors? Not better. Tens of thousands homeless, packed into temporary camps. Food ran short almost at once, as so much of the grain stores were burned up. The once thriving imperial capital looked more like a battlefield. Now, here's where things get interesting. Nero did not delay. Down he came with plans not just to rebuild Rome, but to make it anew.
The old was out, and in came Nero's city of dreams. Wide boulevards to prevent future fires, stone for wood, grand new monuments, and most of all, space for his palace. And this wasn't any palace. It was the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a monstrous, lavish complex sweeping across the middle of the ruined city, with simulated lakes, gold leaf-bedecked banquet halls, ceiling mosaics, and rotating dining rooms with hidden mechanisms. Yes, a rotating dining room in the 1st century A.D. In the center, a massive statue of Nero himself, nearly 100 feet tall, looking down over his people. Subtlety was not his strong point. You're a Roman citizen who had your home burned down last week. You're in a tent, eating moldy bread, and now you look and see the emperor building a city-sized palace with fountains, gardens, and statues, himself. You'd be a little suspicious, wouldn't you? People started gossiping. Did Nero have a hand in starting the fire? Well, the fire had destroyed precisely the property he needed, and instead of caring about rescuing people, he was more interested in decorating his golden chambers. Nero knew that the word was getting around, and that was bad. The Roman aristocracy didn't approve of him in the first place. The people were losing confidence, and so, to rescue himself, he had to point a finger at someone else. Enter the Christians. Christianity now was still an unknown, strange cult to the majority of Romans. They would not worship the Roman gods, they did not intermingle, and they talked of things like the end of the world and a new kingdom. In the Roman mind, they were mysterious, suspicious, and excellent scapegoats. Nero blamed. He claimed it was Christians who had set the city ablaze. And then began one of the first of the great persecutions of history. Christians were rounded up, tortured, and brutally murdered. They were thrown to wild animals in the arena. Others were burned alive, literally used as human torches to light up Nero's gardens in the evening. Tacitus, one of the Roman historians, wrote how repulsive it was, even according to Roman standards, where gladiator combat and public executions were standard fare entertainment. This persecution terrorized the small Christian community, but strengthened them as martyrs. Ultimately, Nero's savagery gave Christianity an unbeatable legend of survival, and ironically enough, assisted its spread. Nero did not escape his atrocities forever. Despite all this, his golden house, his career as a pop singer, his blaming of Christians, it all bred resentment. The Senate started to squirm. The generals hated him. Revolts started erupting throughout the empire. And eventually, in 68 AD, support from his own people turned on Nero. According to tradition, when he realized he was going to be apprehended, Nero took his own life. His last words? Qualis artifex pereo, which means, what an artist dies in me. Even at that point, he had been thinking about his performances. And so, the tale of the Great Fire of Rome wafts into history like the dissipation of smoke in the darkness of the night. To some, it was the day their city burned to the ground. To others, the day suspicion started, rumors of an emperor who might want fires to clear the way for him. And to the small, quiet cluster of Christians, a day of great travail, but also a germ of faith that would grow with each succeeding generation. Rome, the phoenix, arose from the ashes.
Streets were recreated, houses reconstructed, and new monuments erected where ruins had previously existed. And yet, the questions never ceased. Did Nero strum his lyre when the fire burned? Did he fantasize about his palace of gold while the city wept? Maybe we will never know. But history is not always about the answers. Sometimes it is about the secrets left behind, the ones that creep to us across centuries, telling us to wonder, to dream, to imagine. Night descends tonight, and you are sleeping soundly. Picture the ancient streets, torchlight flickering on marble columns, whispers on the wind. A story of loss, of power, of secrets, and of a city that lived. Sleep soundly, aware that history itself is quiet at night. Good night, time traveler.